One of the questions about Compartamos's interest rate is what were other lenders in Mexico charging? Other micro lenders like Compartamos or consumer lenders like pawn shops, credit card companies, appliance stores that sold on credit. We were able to get a good selection of those rates, and it turns out that Compartamos's lending rate was near or below a lot of the consumer lenders' rates, and that the rates that the other microfinance institutions were charging tended to be in the same range as Compartamos's did. Now, from an ethical standpoint, the fact that everyone else is charging those rates doesn't answer the ethical question about whether an agency that is owned by not-for-profit socially oriented institutions should also be charging those rates. But it certainly is the case that those rates did not stand out at all in the Mexican market. And the other microfinance institutions, who are also controlled by socially oriented shareholders, were charging the same kind of rates. Rates have begun to drop in Mexico as a result of this competition, but I don't have current information on that, and I can't say how fast they've been dropping. My own sense is that the managers at Compartamos were quite surprised at the intensity of the negative publicity that they got over their interest rates. And I suppose there's a lesson in there for everyone who's managing microfinance, and that is that in the best of circumstances, the kind of interest rates that you have to charge to make microcredit sustainable are going to be vulnerable publicly. There are numbers of cases, several in India spring to mind immediately, where microfinance managers have been subject to intense public criticism over their interest rates much lower than Compartamos's, I should say, where one gets the sense that they were taken somewhat by surprise by that reaction. And I think all of us need to constantly feel a little bit nervous about the political appearance of the interest rates that we charge, because there's always going to be a strong tendency to view those as being abusive, even when they aren't. There is actually another question that is discussed a lot, and that is the $6 million of money from development agencies and private donors that went into Compartamos when it was an NGO. Have private parties, the new private shareholders, wound up, let's say, inappropriately moving some of that money to their own pockets? This one is actually, for me, fairly straightforward. My answer is no. The donor money that was given to the NGO, the not-for-profit agency. And that not-for-profit agency can't move any of its assets into private pockets. Everything that the NGO has got to stay there and be used for public service activities. Now, what happened when the lending operation was moved into a private for-profit company? Well, the Compartamos not-for-profit put in money in the form of a loan portfolio, and private parties put in money in the form of cash. So each of them contributed something and was entitled to something out of the business. The Compartamos NGO got shares at a preferential price. In other words, when the stock was split between the parties, $1 of portfolio that the Compartamos not-for-profit contributed got more shares than $1 of cash that one of the other investors put in. And all of the shares that are owned by the NGO are subject to all the protections of Mexican law that keep the assets of that NGO from going out to private parties. The only way that this arrangement can be manipulated to give the private investors an unfair advantage is by pricing the shares in a way that just didn't correspond to the real value of the shares. The problem is that in any transaction like that, you are assigning prices to shares and to different people's contributions based on your guess about the future earning potential of the company, which is an unknown at that point in time. Was the price that the private investors paid for their shares, was that a giveaway price? Well, certainly they made tremendous profits on that money that they put in. In retrospect, in 2020 hindsight, they got a tremendous bargain. But at the time, Compartamos was a brand new operation. It was a very risky operation. The people who were putting money in were taking a large risk on an unknown business, a new business in Mexico. And most of the private people who put money in were putting the money in at that time because they believed in the social mission of Compartamos, not because they thought they were going to get rich. I can't say definitely, oh, the price was a fair one, the price was an unfair one, but I know of no basis on which I could assume that it was unfair back then. It's just one of those things that are flying blind when you divide up a company yet to be formed. I know that at the time, when I was told of the pricing of the shares to the various parties coming in, it didn't strike me as abusive or out of bounds. So basically, the money that the donors put in all went into these not-for-profit vehicles, and everything that is earned on the shares, either by dividends or by selling shares, stays in those not-for-profit vehicles. So while I have qualms about the interest rates Compartamos was charging, I don't see any problem with inappropriate diversion of public funds into private pockets there.